Dear friends, welcome to your channel, A Call to Consciousness. Delighted to join me, that you're joining me today. My name is Reverend Juan Enrique Toro. We're going to share a message today entitled The Two Brothers. And we'll begin with another little story about two brothers. These two brothers are gangsters. They're mafiosos. They're killers. They rob. They steal. Terrible in the community. But they like to go to church every Sunday. And it turns out that this particular church had a restoration project going on, a major renovation of the building, very expensive for the church. Well, in the mafioso activity, one of the brothers dies. The other brother wants to have a funeral service for his brother and approaches the minister of the church and says, minister, I'd like to have a funeral service for my brother, and here's a donation for that service. Minister looks at the check and realizes that it's such a huge amount that it would cover the entire restoration project that they had. Instead of doing fundraisers, this would take care of it in one swoop. All of his problems would be solved. So he's kind of taken aback by the amount of the check, and the brother says, I only have one condition. I'd like for you to say during the service that my brother was a saint. Puts the minister in a very difficult place because he knew perfectly well what the two brothers were up to. Minister thinks about it, prays on it, and the day of the funeral arrives. Minister gets up and very honestly says, this fellow was a gangster. He killed people, he stole, he cheated, he extorted. But compared to his brother, this guy was a saint. Thereby fulfilling his contract, able to keep his check. Well, today we're going to be talking about other two brothers, this one from the Bible. It's the story known as the prodigal son. And I am going to read now from the book of Luke, chapter 15, verses 11 through 32. And it says, there was a man who had two sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me. So he divided his property between them. And a few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country. And there he squandered his property in dissolute living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself as one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired hands have bread enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put her arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, Quickly, bring out a robe, and the best one, and put it on him. Put on a ring in his finger, sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate, for the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost, and now he is found. And they began to celebrate. Now, his elder brother was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard the music and the dancing, and he called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. And he replied, Your brother has come home, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he had gotten him back safe and sound. Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, Listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat, so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him." Then the father said to him, "Son, you have always been with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and now has been found." The story of the prodigal son. Actually, it's a misnomer to call this story the prodigal son, because it's really the story of two brothers. And it's important. I think Jesus intended us for us to look at the story in terms of the two brothers, to compare and to contrast them, to see the message that each has for us, and to see ourselves obviously identified with those two brothers. That's what we're going to do today. And so what Jesus is trying to get at with this story basically is how we can connect with God. A very important message for the people of his day, and obviously for us as well today. Let's go through the story first of all. We see that the younger son approaches his father and says, "Father, give me my share of the inheritance." Well, in those days, if a father had two sons, whatever the father had at the time of his death would be divided 2/3 to the elder son and 1/3 to the younger. The younger was asking for his part. Now, anybody hearing this story in those days would be aghast at this request. Because basically, yes, this younger son did have 1/3 of the estate coming to him, but that was after the father's death. The son is asking for this now. The insult of this needs to be seen because the son is basically saying to his father, "You know, Father, I really want what you have to give me. I don't want so much you or this family or this place. All I want is the material good that you have, that I have coming to me." If we say it a little harsher, he's basically wanting his father dead. "You are a means to an ends, Father. I don't necessarily want you or this family. I want what you have to give me." It's a terrible insult. What would have been appropriate for a father of those days, even these days, is to take that son, slap him in the face, kick him upside, and throw him out of the house. But if the listeners of that story were aghast as to what the younger brother did, they would be even more surprised by what the father did. Because the father went out and did what his son asked for. You know, in those days they didn't have huge bank accounts. What he had to do was to basically sell off 1/3 of his property to be able to give that money to his son. In other words, his status in the community was going to go down by 1/3. The identification with the land, the resources that the family had to count on now were reduced by 1/3. It's like cutting off an arm, basically, to give it to your son, and the father does it willingly. Amazing. The son takes the money, leaves, squanders the money, loses it all, and then obviously he comes to himself. And very importantly, two important things happen in that moment of awakening. One, he realizes he's been stupid. I've been stupid. I wasted this money. I need to go and ask for forgiveness of my father. That's number one. But number two, he's got to come back with a plan for restitution. And I'm guessing that he's thinking to himself, I'm going to ask my father if he'd take me back, not as a son, but as a worker on his farm. Because as a worker, I can have a salary. Notice he's not asking to be a slave. He's asking to be a worker. And I'm guessing that in his mind he's thinking, well, if those workers get paid so much, maybe after 25 or 30 years, I'll be able to pay my father back some of the money that he gave me for this land. So he had a plan. He came back with the intention of forgiveness and a plan. We see in the story that he's coming home. His father sees him when he's still far off, and the father goes running out to his son. We need to remember that in those days, men did not run. It was improper for a man of his standing, his status, to run. First of all, it was uncomfortable. The robes and things were not appropriate for men to run. Women would run and children would run, but men would not, especially men with a certain level of prosperity. So the fact that this father is running is also very strange. Not only that, he has emotional abandon. He throws his arms around his son. He kisses him. He welcomes him. And his son, is there, and he's all excited, and he wants to roll out his plan. He says, Father, please forgive me. I have sinned against you and against God. I'm not worthy to be your son. And he's ready to open up his PowerPoint and share his plan for restitution. Look, Father, I got this plan, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to get this money, and I'm going to pay you back. He doesn't even have a chance to present that plan because his father says, whoa, get a robe on him, get a ring, get shoes on. I don't even want you to bathe. Just puts a nice robe over those ugly clothes that you're bringing back, and let's go celebrate. Let's kill the fatted calf and let's go celebrate. I am just so delighted to see you. You don't have to earn your way back into this family. You are my son. And I'm bringing you back in just the way you are. Powerful expression of what God is. The next part of the story is the elder son. It could be known as Act 1 was the younger son. Act 2 is now the older son. Older son comes in from the field, sees all this commotion. What the heck's going on? Well, your brothers come home and your father wants to kill the fatted calf. And so we see this older brother get angry, refuses to go into the party. It is all angry. And there's this business about the fatted calf. We see it appear 3 times. Fatted calf, fatted calf, fatted. What is that all about? Sounds important. Well, notice that there's one fatted calf. It's not like there's a bunch of them. There's one. The idea of the fatted calf in those days was reserved as a resource for a tremendous celebration. Not an annual celebration like a holiday or something, but something spectacular, maybe once every 5 years. And when that fatted calf was killed, the entire town would be invited in. This would be a major celebration. And the resource that they'd been saving for that has now been sacrificed. And the brother is angry. I'm sure he's counting, all the resources that it's taken to run this party. He's being very materialistic here. And he refuses to go in. And so the father comes out and pleads with him to come into the party. But he says to him, the way he addresses him, he doesn't even say father. He says, listen, I've been obeying you all this time, doing everything that you asked, and you never even gave me a small goat. And now this son of yours has been with prostitutes and wasting all this money, all irresponsible, and you're killing the fatted calf and you didn't even ask me about it. We have this resource and we have limited goods and you're using them without my permission or my input on this, and I'm angry about this, and he's insulting the father. Again, another insult. Both the younger son and the older son are giving the father a slap in the face, irrespect, a type of love that is a rejected love. They're rejecting their father. They're insulting their father. And the father sees beyond it. And how does he respond? He says, my son, right? My son. Everything that's mine is yours. But we need to celebrate because your brother was dead and now he's alive. Now, we might ask ourselves, how does the story end? Do the two brothers reconcile? Does the family live happily ever after? We don't know. Jesus never tells us. But what we do know is that in this story we have some very important ideas that will help us see ourselves, maybe a little bit of our shadow ourselves, so that we can have a very close, intimate connection in the presence and power of God. Jesus in this story gives us 3 things. Jesus redefines God, Jesus redefines sin, and Jesus redefines salvation. Let's look at them first. Jesus redefines God. You know that Jesus had the habit of calling God Father, which in itself was a radical thought, right? He's making himself one with the Father, one with God. Very radical for those days. But in this story, Jesus defines what he means by Father. He's demonstrating what kind of Father, what kind of God Jesus is aligning himself with. So it's a very important story for us. So we see in this case the type of Father that Jesus is talking about. Number one, it's a Father that shows reckless abandon for the love of his sons. He's willing to forgive, to not judge, to be very generous. He's willing to act in ways that may be not quite masculine, effeminate perhaps, like a woman or a child. We're seeing that Jesus is presenting a concept of God that is not just harsh and law and strict and tense, maybe powerful, magnificent, but also humble, loving, and tender. This is a radical image. And Jesus is joining those two images in this one Father. Basically, Jesus is saying, in your life, maybe your father wasn't like this. Maybe your father was a little stiff. Maybe he was a little emotional. Maybe he judged you. Maybe he was harsh. Maybe he didn't know quite how to express these emotions. But my Father is like this. And he's presenting it to us. This is my Father. This is my God. This is the family that I represent. So, in joining these qualities, Jesus is joining the power and the magnificence of God with the humility, with the tenderness, with the love of God. In Unity, we speak about paradox, and in paradox what we do is we join concepts that seem contradictory, but they really aren't. And so we have a concept in Unity called the presence of God, and we have the concept of the principle of God. Presence and principle. God is both presence and principle. What we mean by principle is that law aspect of God. That eternal, unchanging law that is God, is that one presence, that one power, that isness that does not change. It is unbreakable, eternal. It is law. It is not soft or warm or tender. It just is. We also speak about the presence of God. What we mean by that is that tenderness, is that feeling nature, is that love, is that moment in prayer when we open up and suddenly feel that power and presence of God, and we know that whatever heaviness we've been holding on to is released. We know that, we've been carrying some heavy weight, and because of the successful prayer activity we've had, we've been able to release it, to forgive a burden, to lay it down, to find our way through it, to find peace, to find light in the darkness, and all these ways in which God shows up. And we actually feel it in the body. We call that the presence of God. And we say that God is both presence and principle, just like Jesus is saying in this moment. So Jesus is teaching us and redefining the concept of God. Very important for us. Next, he's also redefining sin. In Act 1, the story of the younger brother, we see what we could call a traditional definition of sin. All right, we can all say, oh yeah, he committed sin. He took that money, he went and squandered it. He lost it all. He was very egotistical. He was all materialistic. He was just thinking it's all about me. He went and lost it all, totally irresponsible, maybe addicted. He's a loser. He really messed up. That's real sin. We can say, yeah, okay, I can see that. The interesting thing about this story is that in Act 2, we see sin portrayed in a very different way in the older brother. The older brother, as you know, has been the good brother. He's been the one that stayed at home. He obeyed his father. He's been doing his duty. And yet, Jesus is telling us that he is no less separated. He is no less lost. He is no less apart from the heart of his father than the younger brother. They're both lost. They both fell into sin. Let's see if we can understand the older brother. The older brother is very concerned about the material aspect, and when he's so angry about the use that the father has of the fatted calf, of the party, of the way his brother showed up, shows us that what the brother was doing was really sort of biding his time until his father died so that he could then inherit the 2/3 of the property that his father had for him. Basically what he's saying, exactly like his younger brother, he's saying, Father, what I want is what you have to give me, the material good. That's what I want. That's what I love. Not so much you or this family or this home. I just want the material. I want the safety. I want the security. I want the status. I want the power. I want everything that you have to give me, but I don't really want you. And so he is doing all the right things, but he's falling into the trap of separation. We do the same thing when we believe that we're doing everything right for God. We do our prayer work. We go to Unity every Sunday. We tithe. We serve. We work on forgiveness. We go to the workshops. We fill our notebooks up and we do our work. But secretly what we're doing is we're doing these things so that we can receive the blessings that we believe God has for us. In other words, we're saying to God, God, see how good I am? I'm doing all the right things. Now you can give me the blessings that I want. My health, my prosperity, power, position. Answer my prayers, please, because you, God, you owe me. You owe me because I've been so good. Do you see that the older brother and the younger brother have fallen into the same trap through different vehicles? One being very, very bad, one being very, very good. But it's the same trap. Now we need to be able to identify ourselves with the older brother. The younger brother is easy. Any one of us who sees we've committed a mistake can own up to that. Say, oh yeah, I messed up. I was stupid. All right, great. That's a very important part, but pretty easy. The more difficult part, perhaps, is to say, you know, I've been doing it all right. And I realize now that it's all wrong. You know, what Jesus is teaching us in this story is that we can do all the right things for the wrong reason. We want what God has for us, but we don't want God. So a teacher of mine used to say it like this: God doesn't have what we want. God is what we want. Let me repeat that. Take a deep breath. Let me repeat that with you. God doesn't have what we want. God is what we want. So Jesus is redefining sin for us here. Hopefully we can see ourselves in this trap of how to control God to give us what we want. The younger brother rejects God and wants to control his own life through, I'm going to do it my way. But the older brother wants to control God by saying, I'm the obedient, I'm the good one. I deserve to be blessed. You owe me, God. And Jesus is telling us, it doesn't work that way. God doesn't have what we want. God is what we want. So Jesus in the story also redefines for us salvation. How do we get the motivation to move into the salvation mode? How do we get into that mode? And the story gives us 3 ideas as to how to get in there. First of all, it's the initiating love of God. Second of all, it's forgiveness or redemption, whatever you want to call it. And the third is to be willing to pay the price to live in the house of the Father. Let's look at each one of these. First of all, the initiating love of God. My guess is that if you're listening to this program, that you have had an experience of the presence and the power of God. Principle and presence. that you know God is there and intellectually, but that you've also had that experience of the initiating love of God. That there's been a moment in your life when that's been quickened, when you felt it, when you knew it, when there was a healing, when there was something fantastic, you sensed it, you knew it, and in your heart you said yes. If you have not had that experience, then the most important thing for you to do is to work on having that experience for yourself. You can stop the tape here and dedicate your life to having an experience of the love of God in your life. We do this through opening our heart, through prayer, through meditation. If you're confused about that, seek out some guidance from a local minister or spiritual leader. Read some books, attend some workshops, do whatever it is that you need to do to be able to have that direct and undoubted experience of the presence and power of God in your life. That is the most important thing. Without that, there's no way we can move forward into this idea of salvation or coming home. And you know when you'll have it, because you'll sense it. It'll be in your body. It'll be in your cells. There'll be something that screams out. It's different for everybody, but you will know what it is. Without a doubt, you will say, that is the presence of a loving God. Now, for those of you who have had this experience, let me just ask you to remind yourself of a powerful experience of that. Recall it with me now. And sense it in the body. Feel it. Let it tingle. See if you can remember the excitement of the awareness of knowing, whoa, that is God. Because it is that energy, it is that consciousness that Jesus is calling forth in this story. The younger brother wakes up and says, I've been stupid, I've been a fool. Look at me. The love of God enters his heart. And that's where he comes up for his plan for redemption. If we were to ask the older brother, what are the list of your sins? The older brother would have said, I have no sins. I've been good. I've been obeying. That's the part where we need to really work on. We need to be willing to see the error of that. How we've been trying to control God, manipulate God to give us what we want, what we really want. We don't want God. We want money. We want a job. We want healing. We want peace. We want that. We don't want God. So, in order for us to come into that salvation, the idea of forgiveness work or redemption work, we need to be willing to see that dynamic within us. You know, there's nothing in us that deserves anything. Life is given us as it is. And we can choose. We can choose to go forth and continue with our 9 to 5, with our work, with this, or we can choose to go explore new avenues of blessing for ourselves. We can make conscious choices to pay our taxes or not pay our taxes. We can choose any dynamic, but we need to take responsibility for it and not feel that if I am doing something, then you owe me because I've been good to you, because I've obeyed you, because I've followed the rules. Nobody owes you anything. Let that go. And forgive yourself for holding on to that consciousness and just take life as it is today. You know, the Course in Miracles has a line that says, in your embrace, all of my sorrows disappear. In your embrace, all of my sorrows disappear. So we take that heaviness of being the good older brother, of obeying. Turn it over, let it go. We don't need it. We make decisions that we feel are the best, we take responsibility for them, and we move forward. Finally, the third idea is the price we need to pay for us to come into the house of the Father. In the story, we ask ourselves, what was the price that needed to be paid? We might say initially, well, there was no price. It was free. You know, the son just came in, the father welcomed him, that was that. But if you think about it, everything that was left on that farm eventually would come into the hands of the older brother. In other words, any additional expenses of that farm were going to be deducted from his eventual inheritance. And so the fact that the fatted calf was killed, a tremendous resource, the fact that they're having this party was all coming out of the elder brother's pocket in one way or another. He was paying a tremendous price. And every day that goes by when he has to, foot the bill for the care of his brother is less for him eventually. Now, if the older brother had been a good older brother, what he would have done is, after the younger brother had been gone for a while, he would have said to his father, "Father, I know you're worried about my younger brother. Let me go in search of him. I don't care what it costs, and I'll bring him home so we can be together again." That would have been a good older brother. But that's not what the story tells us. So the price that we need to pay is, how do we move from that older brother in the story to really become part of the house? The father was modeling for both of his sons the consciousness that is necessary to live in that house. Generosity, love, forgiveness, judgment-free, humility, generosity. All of these qualities, both masculine and feminine, that the father is demonstrating is what the father is modeling for both of his sons. Both of them need to align themselves, need to let go of the anger, need to let go of the guilt, need to let go of the stinginess or the me first consciousness. That's the price that we need to pay in order to live in the house of the Father. Jesus dared to say, "The Father and I are one." He's saying, I live in the house of the Father. I model my life around my Father. I am loving to the best of my ability, unconditionally. I am generous. I forgive. I let go of judgment. I am humble. I am willing. All of these qualities are what's being asked of us. And you might say, well, that sounds nice, but what's in it for me? The father answers at the very end of the story. Son, daughter, everything that's mine is yours. When you come into the consciousness of the oneness with God, all that God is, you are. All that God is, I am. All that God is, I am. It's a beautiful affirmation for us to take from this story. Everything that God is, I am. I am generous. I am humble. I love unconditionally. I let go. I forgive. I embrace. I celebrate. I yearn for our connection. The father runs out to the younger brother. The father goes out to the older brother, pleads for him to come into the party. The father is reaching out for you, reaching out for me, wanting us to come into the fold of the Father's house, to be one in that environment, and to know our oneness and to celebrate, because just like the older brother and the younger brother, we've been out in the far country. This is an invitation to come home. Come home to the Father. God doesn't have what we want. God is what we want. God bless you. I love you.